So, welcome to the 10th class of developing iOS apps with Swift. So, last session, we actually managed to have a version of our app where we can see a list of a fragment of the characters provided by the Marvel API. And we can see their thumbnails along with a proper title along them. So what we are going to do now is make sure that we are actually fetching the rest of the characters. The reason why we are just getting a few is because by default the API will give us just a single page. Not sure about the exact amount, but what we're going to do now is basically adjust this service so that we can pass in uh, basically a different page, and so that it will retrieve for us a different set of characters every single time we scroll down in our app. So the idea is whenever we reach the end of the scroll view, we will ask for the next page. So what we need in order to make this happen is, first of all, alter this a little bit, because right now we only have a way to just fetch characters, but we don't really have a way to provide exactly what page we want to retrieve. So what we want to do is tweak this API a little bit in order to make that happen. All right, so what we can do is actually, instead of having the concept of pages, we can provide an offset so that we can ask for the API for the exact offset they're requiring. In this case, we can pass in to the API through your query the concept of offset. Basically, we can pass in the exact offset we take as a parameter. So we are going to receive it here. And we're going to say this is named. So of course, this time our application is going to break because we are using these first characters without passing in an offset. So we will need to provide an offset here. First of all, we need to figure out exactly what this offset is going to be about. So in order to figure out exactly what the offset is, we need to have one more concept here, and that is going to be basically the page. So we're going to create a new variable because it's meant to change, something called current page, which by default is going to start at 0. And basically that way, whenever we fetch characters for the first time, we are going to change that page. So we can say whenever we fetch successfully, our current page is going to be incremented by 1. But in order to figure this out, the offset is actually meant to be the operation of multiplying the current page paired times the amount of items we want to retrieve per page. So we may want to create a constant for that. So we can say items per page equals, let's say, 100. And that way, we are going to say we have an offset of items per page times current page, or the other way around, it doesn't matter. That way we can pass in this offset, which is basically what we're going to use now for letting the API know that we want a different page of characters. So we are already doing this, but then we may have some misbehaviors if we don't provide the concept of blocking loading more content while we are already fetching more content. So we may also want to include another variable called is fetching. So we have a clear understanding that something's happening when it comes to network downloading content. So by default is going to be false. But whenever before we start the actual operation, we're going to change this to true. That way we can use this as a safety measure so that we don't try to fetch content every single time we actually get to the very end of the scroll view. and something is already happening actually. So we're going to update this as well, because whenever it is complete, we should change this back to false. Right. So another thing we have to configure is actually calling this whenever we reach the end of the scroll view. So it turns out the UI table view is actually a scroll view. So the delegate we subscribe to whenever we assign the delegate. Um, in here, we are assigning itself as a delegate of the table view. Um, we can also subscribe to events that correspond to specifically to the scroll view events. So we can look for the delegate here. For example, we are using it to define the height, but we can subscribe to a function that is meant to be only for scroll views, considering the table view is also a scroll view. So we can say we want to subscribe to scroll view with scroll, and this is going to give us an instance of the scroll view, and that's it, and we can play with this. So I'm going to basically provide some logic that I already have here. So this is basically running some calculations to understand the current position of the scroll view and see if we're actually at the very end. And basically the question that we are going to ask now is whether the offset y minus the content height minus the visible height, another operation, is just like something that is already prepared to describe to the fact that we are at the very end. And basically when this happens, this means we reach the end. So we can actually make this more elegant and say we have a constant that says scroll view reached end, and ask for this operation, Boolean operation. And then we can say if scroll view reached end, we are going to just trigger again our load data. So what is going to happen now is we are already subscribing to this because the delegate characters list controller is actually the delegate of the table view. So whenever this event is triggered, we're going to run calculations, ask whether the scroll view already reached the end, and if it did, we're going to recall load data. Except this time, current page is going to be probably 1, because the very first time we call load data is when we load the view for the first time. So next time we load is going to load the second page. In this case, this is the 1 page. And so on. Every single time we keep scrolling down and loading more data, this is going to increase and basically ask for different pages. So that is it. We pass in the offset, which is just the multiplication of items per page and current page. And we passing this to the query parameters of the URL, so that basically in our instance that we need an offset, offsetted result of characters. So let's try and run this and see what happens. All right, so we can see, look, we can see we are actually loading more and more content, but this is actually misbehaving. And that's exactly the reason why we introduced the concept of is fetching. The reason why it's misbehaving is because it's loading over and over because we stay at the very end of the scroll view. And that's because we're not using it in any way. We're just writing it, but we're never using it. So there's a point where we need to ask whether we want to load data or not. So in this case, we can actually ask this in here and say if it's fetching equals false, go ahead and load data. Otherwise, don't even try it because we are already loading data anyway. So let's run this again. And this is way back. So basically, we're already getting a bunch of characters, but then, okay, we can also see something is happening. This is being replaced over and over. We can go back to the first ones. And that's because we made a mistake. We are actually replacing completely the list of characters every single time we get results. What we need to do is append to the previous collection of characters that we had fetched before. So what we can do in this case, instead of replacing completely, is appending the contents of the new sequence, place its characters. And that way it's going to behave the way we expect it to. Right? We scroll down, we just get more. We don't get them replaced. The first ones are still there and we can still navigate back to them. Then again, this is the B. If we scroll down, we start getting from C, and so on. We already have a functional infinite list of characters from the Marvel API, and we're just literally leveraging exactly what the API has to offer for us, which is this offset query parameter that we need to pass in order to get different values. All right, so let's explore something else. Now we may want to navigate to be able to see the details of each of the characters. So let's start talking about navigation. So there are different kinds of navigation. What we are going to talk about now is the regular navigation link, which means we're going to transition to a different page, but we're not going to open a different context because this is all part of the same workflow. We're just iterating across a list of characters, and we want to be able to read the details of each of the characters. So let's start exploring how to create a new controller and how we want to navigate to it in order to see the details of our character. Okay, so what we should probably do is follow the example of this list controller, where we need to inherit from the UI view controller in order to create a new one, and basically subscribe to this view did load so that we can fetch data specifically to that character. So let's go ahead and create a new controller. We can hit new file, cottage class, and you can say we want a character view controller. Let's change the want a regular controller. And we can remove this view. We can say character, maybe detail. All right. So we created, it already provides some basic stuff for us. We're going to remove this. And we're going to stick with this. So we may want to, first of all, establish exactly what our state is going to look like for us here. In this case, we need a character. So we should have a character from the very beginning. So we're going to say we have a character defined with, which is actually meant to exist. But in the very initial phase of the life cycle, it may be nil. That's why we are calling this implicitly unwrapped, because there will be a point where this character doesn't exist yet. So that's the first step. Now we need to provide a way to create this controller and pass in this character. So what we can do is create a static function that creates this with a character. Character, and this is a type character. And this is going to return a character detail controller. And basically, in this case, what we do is basically return the character detail controller, or sorry, have it, and then saying the controller has character, which is the character we just received as parameter, and then return the controller. And this is it. We're just dropping a very simple functionality in order to allow us to create easily a detailed controller with a character, which then we'll be able to use there. Okay. Um, so after this, we want to be able to run certain setup so that our controller looks the way we want it to. But first of all, let's talk about the navigation, and then we can center the details of what the actual detail is going to look like. So um, what we can do whenever this loads is say, okay, title of this controller is actually going to be the name of the character. And that way, we already have a very basic controller that doesn't show any content, and we just print the title on the navigation bar corresponding to the character we just iterated to. So in order to make this happen, we want to actually make the navigation happen. And that will happen whenever we select a cell. So we can again use this subscribe to an event from the UI table view delegate, which corresponds to the selection of a cell. So let's say we are hitting the select row at, and basically we can follow the same logic in order to read the exact character that we just picked based on the index path. That way we have an exact access of the character instance we are targeting whenever we hit the cell. And then after that, since we already have a character, so we can go ahead and create a controller we want to navigate to. And that controller we can create through the static function that we just implemented. That's basically a builder function we can just rely on right here. And say character the controller has a make function where I can pass in a character, and it returns the exact detail controller that I need, which we will be allocating in this constant. After that, what we can do is basically say push. What is this push? Okay. Because we need to do it against the navigation controller. Yeah, exactly. So basically, we have the concept of a navigation controller because whenever we created the very first scene, we determined that the root view controller is actually navigation controller. That will give us the option to have regular navigation link navigation. That's redundancy, but that's the way it's called. And basically, with this navigation controller, I can access it and say, okay, I want to navigate to it through a push animation. This will take a UI view controller, which in this case is the controller we want to navigate to. And we want to say this is actually animated. All right, so we can run and see what happens. Okay, so we have our list of characters. Let's see what happens if we hit one. We're actually navigating to something. We're actually getting just a black screen because there's no content whatsoever. We're probably getting our character name right here, but we're not seeing it because we haven't. There's no way to differentiate between black and black. So let's actually tweak this a little bit. See if we can see it. We can say the view.background color is actually let's say system background. And that system background, we are not using the static color because we want this to be able to change if the user changes to dark mode. So system background color will change accordingly based on that. Okay, so we're actually having the name of the character here, just as we mentioned. Let's say with this. Okay, exactly. Perfect. So we are already providing a very basic animation. We don't see any content, but at least we are setting the title to the character name. And then the next step is basically to start laying out exactly what we want our detailed page to look like. So we may want to reintroduce the thumbnail again here with the title, maybe the description. We already have a very basic character information here. And we can also use the character service to fetch more information about this specific character. So let's play with what we have right now and start laying out some of the content we already have, like the thumbnail, the name of the character, we're already showing it actually, and the description. Okay, so the first thing we can do is create a function called setup that is going to take care of all the responsibility of laying all that out. And then we call the setup here. All right. So we're going to follow the example of the character list where we have a character table view that we are adding at some point at this here. Yep. And then we at setup, what we do is just configure the table view, add it to this view, and activate all the constraints that will determine the exact positioning and sizing of this component. So we're going to put it side by side so that we can follow the example. All right. So in this setup, we want to have, let's create a section for URLs. And we're going to say this has an image view, let's say a picture image view that is actually an image view. And it's going to start being nil or not. We can just like start right away whenever we try to access it for the first time. This is called lazy initialization. Can't convert, yeah, because we're not returning anything yet. So let's create the image view. On the image view, but we don't have it configured yet because we don't have an image to set yet. So we just need to be conscious of that. So the first thing we're going to do is actually add to our view, this is view of the picture imagery. We're going to basically say that we don't want this to translate to authorization mask. So we're going to say false here. The way will give us the option to basically start using the system of constraints of auto layout, where we can actually manually set all the rules we want it to have in order to position and size. So to make this happen, we want to call ns layout. Great. And we can pass in all the array of constraints we want to set. So first thing we want to set is probably the top. So we are going to say picture image view dot top anchor dot constraint equal to another anchor, which is going to be our main anchor. And this is it. We already have our first constraint, right? The second one is going to be the leading and the trailing, so that it notes the horizontal boundaries. So we want to say it has a leading anchor that actually also matches with the parent, in this case is view. And finally, we may want to provide a height so that it notes what the height is gonna, what the end of the bottom is gonna be like. So in this case, we want to set something maybe fixed. Height anchor constraint equal to constant, and we can say this is like 220 degrees. Right. So we're already adding the image view. We are setting the constraints. The problem is we don't have a way to print the actual image just yet. So in order to make this happen, since all we have from the character information is the URL, we may want to rely on the function we had created before that would take the responsibility of actually fetching the image, downloading the image, and setting it into the cell. In this case, we were working on the cell, and we want to bring in this code here. So this logic is actually not meant only for cells. because this is literally just downloading the image and delivering a image to a resolver. So we may want to take this to a global scope, maybe in character service that share the same place. For now, make sure we haven't broken anything. Okay, this is complaining because we are returning the UI image, but we are not importing UI kit. So we need that because UI image comes from UI kit. And basically, we can use this load image to download the image of the detail of the character and set it on the corresponding image. Okay, so what we can do is for this setup, we want to load an image from an URL. This URL comes from a thumbnail.url. Of course, in this case, we need to make sure that this is not nil, so we want to verify that first. And then if we do have an URL different than nil, we want to use it, let's say, which is going to get an instance of a UI image that we're going to use. And whenever we get it, we go back to the main thread unless we already did. Let's take a look. We are not going back to the main thread, so we need to. So we're going to use this patch queue.main.async. And we're going to update our picture image view and set the image. All right, so okay, this is complaining because we are accessing something from an instance member and we are not saying this comes specifically from self. So we need to state that. And we may also want to say this is a weak reference so that if it doesn't exist anymore, no problem. Right, this is called conditional chaining. So we are capturing the self reference so that if this actually comes back to it when the controller is no longer existing, basically it's going to try to set the image view to a nil instance. That's going to fail, but it's going to gracefully fail because the instance is gone. So we are saying this is irrelevant. We don't want to call this if self is no longer existing. So let's run and see what happens. All right, so we already have a very first instance. This is looking a bit weird because of the content mode, so we may want to tweak that. And say this is aspect here. And actually, we may want to make this, first of all, we may want to put a constant here so that it goes below the navigation bar, maybe an 80 will be. And we also may want to tweak the size so that it's a bit bigger, maybe like 300, because what this looks like. Yeah, much better, except for the 80 wasn't enough for us to stop covering the navigation bar. So usually the reason why this is working this way is because we're interacting with the full container of the view. There's actually a way to access the safe area of this. Let's see if I remember how to do this. There's a way to take area insets. I don't think this is it. Oh, okay. Set our layout guide at top anchor. That way we can say actually this is a 0 again. It's going to play along with the safe area instead of the complete parent. No, didn't work. This doesn't seem that was the anchor I was looking for. Okay, what we can do with the insets. No, not working either. There's a way to actually set the constraint again in the save area. Just forgot. So I owe you this for the next session. But in the meanwhile, this is what we have. We have basically a way to navigate. First of all, we can't just fetch the full list of characters and navigate to anyone. We can see the title, the name of the character on the detail, and the thumbnail, which is exactly what we already have. And maybe we want to include the description here real quick. So let's do it actually. Let's create real quick a label, description label. On the label, but then we're going to tweak it a little bit so that we can say we don't want this to translate automatically to constraints. And then we want this label number of lines to be 0 so that it dynamically adapts to as many lines as we need. All right, and we need to return the execute, okay. And we're going to add the subview. Right, and we want to set the root here. So description label of anchor actually matches the feature image view red bottom anchor. Maybe by a little bit, like maybe 20 points. We also want this so that it matches horizontally the container. So we just replace this word here. And we want to say the bottom anchor matches the parent as well, so that it takes the full height remaining. That's true. And then finally, we want to set the content of that description label. So we're going to say description label dot text is going to be equal to character dot. For some reason, we don't have the description here. So we're going to replace it a little bit, the service or the character model, because this character is actually meant to have a description at the same level of the name. So we're going to say this has a description, which is a string. That way, we can say description label dot text equals character dot description. All right, so let's run it and see what it looks like. Right, it's not getting any. I think there are certain characters that are not getting any description whatsoever. Look, this one has it. So there it is. We already have exactly what we need. What we can do if we don't want this to go to the center is have it have a dynamic height. So maybe we don't want to include this bottom anchor. I think this will allow that because the label automatically adapts the size. So it creates some constraints for us underneath. Yeah, exactly. Except for some reason, this is offsetting. And the reason why this is happening actually is because we're letting our image leak. So we want to say check the bounds that the image won't leak whatsoever. And basically, whenever we adapt the top anchor to the bottom anchor by 20, it is not going to offset. Revisit the front work again, and here it is. We already have it. So the image was leaking before and against the actual boundaries of the component. Okay. Let's actually trick this to have score it 120 so that it looks better and doesn't hide the name of the character. Let's see if 120 was enough. Yeah, a bit more maybe. Could be 100. Yep, this is perfect. There's a lot of characters that don't have descriptions. There are some though, for example. And this is it. We already have a way to navigate to different characters and see the details and description of them. Um, so on next session, we will focus on creating functionality to search for characters and maybe something else. Okay, so any question?
Yeah, I saw that you had to add manually all of the sizings and the paddings for the image.
Mhm.
But why isn't the action bar, or however you call it on iOS,
Mhm.
why is the image behind the action bar and the title rather than being
Oh,
underneath?
because we are using the view, which is like the actual parent, and we are not interacting with the safe area. So there's a concept called safe area. I just don't recall right now how to create constraints against the safe area. Let's explore this a little bit more to see if we find it. There's a way to actually say this goes against the safe area and not against the view, because we're interacting with the view, which is the parent like takes precedence over the very beginning of the screen. That's why whenever we say we're matching the top anchor, it's going behind because it's using the full size, which is the parent view. But if we interact with the safe area, it's going to understand that there are certain constraints it can't pass. Like for example, whatever comes after the notch or the dynamic island. Um, so basically, that will be untouchable if we interact with the safe area instead of this view. So yeah, I just don't recall right now how to interact with the safe area, but yeah, I can revisit that on next session.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, guys. So see you later. That was it. Thank you so much.
Okay, ciao.
Bye.